Hi, everyone. I want to invite you to our second session here. Let me get this going from the big screen. There we go. This is session 2 of 4 for our summer program sponsored by the state of Missouri and the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. So the first week we became a little bit more acquainted about supply chain and logistics and transportation and how they kind of fit together and some of the economics of it and other facets of it, of course. And then, of course, we took the 2 tours. So this week we're going to talk about distribution center management, which really is a combination of several different types of facility management strategies, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But this week we're going to have Herb Hall from Procter and Gamble, Procter and what? Yeah, Procter and Gamble come in and talk to us about their operation and opportunities for the high school graduate at P&G. And then Brad Reinhardt, who is president of a local freight brokerage and is extraordinarily well connected in the regional marketplace, will be coming and talking to us about other opportunities within the motor carrier industry and companies that he deals with as well. So I think you're going to have an interesting week. And then when we return from our tour, which will be to Save-A-Lot and to DESE, both over in Edwardsville near the 2 Amazon sites. We're going to come back and talk, do some download on what you saw and where this takes us, and then play a little simulation game, and then break into some small groups for some small group work. So let's get started on this. We're going to be looking at this for the next maybe 25 minutes or so, not much more than that, I hope. So let's get into it. Okay, one of the things that we use a lot is we use this report. It's the Council of Supply Chain Management Professionals. It's the latest report, which is 2017. It's really looking at 2016 data. So the new 2018 report will be out in the next 60 days or so. But what we're going to be talking about are these 2 areas here called storage and other, which is obsolescence. What else is it? Shrinkage, insurance, handling. These are the costs that you would be looking at in a warehousing type operation, and you can see it's roughly $300 billion. So it's a significant number. Obviously, not as significant as the transportation number, which is very close to 900 billion. But out of a million, out of 1,000,004, it's still 25%. So it's a significant number, and of all the expense that goes into it. It also includes the financial cost of storing inventory, which we call the weighted average cost of capital, which is the amount of inventory times basically whatever the company pays for financing its own inventory. So if you add all that up, now you're looking at roughly 400 million. So you're looking at a little over a third of it at that stage. And this will become more important to you as we get through the next session. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about, we're going to expose some terms to you. We're going to give you some definitions on what some of these are. And as we make our tours this week, I think you'll see that, for example, the Save-A-Lot facility is a private warehouse, and the DESE warehouse is a contract warehouse. It's run by a third-party logistics provider. They may or may not have warehouse management systems. I would suspect they are. They may also do some of these other activities in there, which we'll discuss in just a little bit. Some very basic models of what some of these are. So these are the terms we're going to be looking at, and hopefully it will all kind of fit together as we get into it. Traditionally, most of us, when we think about a warehouse, we think of a place to store inventory. And what I will tell you is that is not the case. When we talk about warehousing today, we are talking about how fast can we get it in and get it out. And it's all about velocity of inventory. It's not about storing anything. So when we talk about storage of inventory, it's a different kind of warehouse, which we're going to define here in a minute. But the interesting thing about warehouses is that they're really one of the most complex areas of supply chain management because they are a point of intersection for everybody that's in that supply chain. So if there is warehouses in the supply chain, then that activity has to go through that node. And because there's so many different types of activities that can take place within a warehouse, and it becomes very complex. And sometimes we have dedicated warehouses to do just one of those activities rather than all those activities. But we'll see a little bit later on what a typical type of solutions are that you're going to find in these warehouses we're going to be visiting. So just to kind of give it a little sharper definition, when we talk about shipments to the customer, we're really talking about distribution centers or fulfillment centers. So that's a type of a warehouse, okay? And so that's what we're talking about. So products come in, they're all gathered there, they're all mixed together, they come from all these places, and then they are stored for a shorter period of time as they can, and then they are shipped to the final customer, and then there's a replenishment of that demand back through that warehouse. So that's the typical thing that we're really talking about. When we're talking about a warehouse as a definition, we're really talking about raw materials, parts, and work in process, otherwise known as generally a factory warehouse. And yes, there are warehouses in virtually every factory of some sort. So these are the two types of definitions, and these are very different roles and very different responsibilities within the supply chain. So why do we have them? Well, we have them for lots of reasons, and some of which may be self-evident. One, there are certain circumstances where we have seasonal production. So for example, it's not unusual if you have a seasonal item, like a lawnmower, for example, you're going to build them ahead of time and store them and then ship them into Home Depot a month or so before the season starts. But then after September, they're going to send them all back to you because they're going to take that whole thing down and convert it over to winter. So seasonal production is a reason why you want to look at it. Same thing for seasonal demand. The demand for those products that may be conversely subjected to seasonal production have that seasonal demand. So a good example there would be something like Christmas tree ornaments. They have to come in, or holiday ornaments. They have to come in generally from overseas, but because the supply chain is so long, they have to be ready to be in the stores either before Thanksgiving or whatever, based upon when they need it. So seasonal demand says you're going to forward stock in advance of some kind of an event. So that's, again, you need a warehouse for that or a distribution center for that. Production economies. This one's near and dear to my heart because what this says is the factories, there are economics in manufacturing that say the larger the lot size that you run, the lower your actual standard cost is. And that has to do with manufacturing economics and economies based around absorption of overhead. So if you produce more items in a certain period, if you produce more items in general, then you've absorbed overhead at a faster rate than what you budgeted in your standard cost. So production economies do play a role. And this is something that I had to deal with for many, many years with factories that ran kind of not based on demand as much as they had budgeted to run so much product over the course of the year. And there may be one item that they run once a year, but they run 6 months demand at that time when they run it. So that has to go somewhere. The factory doesn't have a warehouse, so it came into one of our distribution centers and we stored it for them. So that's another side of this that is very real. Quick supply. A good example of this is if you have a new product introduction, for example, and you need to have that product staged and forward stocked and ready to go for a new product introduction on a given day, then you're going to have some kind of a distribution solution to do that. And so that's another reason to do it. When we were part of American Home Products, we did this frequently for some of our sister divisions who were in over-the-counter analgesics and products like that. They would send products to us ahead of time, and then we would send them out to the wholesale distributor. This one, I think, should be self-evident based upon all of our understanding that we want everything in 2 hours. So you have a warehouse because you can't get to where you need to get to in the time frame you have. And so as clearly for certain categories of products, this is a very significant issue. And so this actually is starting to create a new type of warehouse, which we'll talk about in just a few minutes. But this is one of the issues, is right here, is the service level that the company has to meet is a trade-off between the level of inventory, the transportation costs, and the inclusion or exclusion of a distribution center or a warehouse in the middle of that transaction. I'll show you that. Transportation economies themselves help drive warehouses. So you'll see there's types of warehouses where goods come in, they get mixed up, they get assorted, they get built into loads, and then a mixed load of product goes into, for example, a common market. A good example that's a master distribution center like Walmart has. So all the products come into the master distribution center. That master distribution center supports 50, 60 stores. So all the product that's in those stores goes into that one master distribution center, and then the inventory analyst for the buyer then allocates that product directly into each store if it already hasn't been pre-allocated by the buyer into the store, in which case it's just basically a cross stock, which we'll talk about too. And then we just mentioned the fact that sometimes you need that warehouse to supplement whatever the factory may have in raw materials or work in process or parts. So this is another role and another reason why you kind of need these kind of products. So this is what we call the logistics trade-off curve. So it's exactly what I just said. As transportation goes down, warehousing costs go up because the closer you are, the further away you are from the market, obviously the higher your cost to get it there. When you insert the warehouse, you're able to trade that off for a lower cost of transportation, but the cost of financing your inventory plus the cost of warehousing itself are reflected in this cost curve. So we know about this from what we talked about last time, which is logistics. So this is where we talk about logistics costs. Okay, and you know from before that logistics is transportation, warehousing, inventory, customer service, all the various physical sides of executing an order. And these are called trade-offs. So any action in one of those categories impacts will impact another activity in either a positive or a negative way. And certainly in this market, the better the availability we have, it's more about meeting the customer's expectation. And that means sometimes you will have a warehouse even though you really may not need it, but you can't afford to miss that customer service window, because at this stage of the game and the markets we're in right now, you're not just risk losing a customer, you risk losing your business because there's somebody back there who's going to give it to you. Right? So this is the world we're in now. It's all about the customer experience and the customer convenience. So let's take a look at by ownership type. So we talked about there's public warehouses. So public warehouses hold themselves out to anybody. You're talking about a contractual relationship. It'll be a multi-tenant type environment. So you'll be in it, and 5 or 6 other companies may be in it, and they will run your operation separate from their operation and charge you for the services. A private warehouse is going to be something like Save-A-Lot, where they own it and they operate it, and it's their employees. So contract then is more like DESE, which is a third-party logistics provider, which contracts out its warehouse on behalf of one customer. And so that one customer, they operate this warehouse on behalf of one customer. So that's what a 3PL does. A 3PL can also be a public warehouse. A bonded warehouse is a term we use in global transportation management. It allows you to bring your products closer to your destination market, and by keeping them in bond, you don't have to declare them into the commerce into commerce of the United States, so you avoid duties and taxes. You defer. You don't eliminate, but you defer duties and taxes on the goods that are in the bonded warehouse until you absolutely need to bring them in. This is something that was very common when we were at Emerson, where we had a lot of raw materials coming in from Asia, and we put them into a bonded warehouse on the Mexican border, and then we pulled them out of that bonded warehouse and delivered them the next day into the factory. So we had this we hadn't paid, we weren't, the inventory we really didn't own. We hadn't paid duties, we hadn't paid taxes. That was all part of the procurement price negotiated with the supplier. It's called a vendor mall, but it was a bonded warehouse. This is a very complicated thing to do, but it can be very, very beneficial if you need it. Government warehouses are generally at ports, airports and seaports, because when goods come in and they get quarantined or they get refused, they go to a government warehouse. So, and then you have a certain amount of time to get them out. And a cooperative is a situation where that's kind of more heavily based around agricultural. So you have farmers co-ops and farm bureaus and things like that, and they will share a warehouse like for grain and stuff like that. And they'll ship together, and they can do that legally as a shippers association. So those are some ownership types. So these are kind of a very simple, very quick example. So a consolidation center is you have multiple sources. In this case, we just use, well, they have multiple plant A, it should be A, B, and C, but anyway. And these multiple suppliers ship into this consolidation warehouse, which then mixes, accumulates, sorts, and then doesn't store, okay? But it then will ship into a market. So in this case, the goods are coming in, they're being processed quickly, put into, and then shipped into a final market, not to a specific customer, but to a market. And then in that market, then there's another activity that breaks it down by customer. So you're talking about basically full truckload here, and then some kind of a less than truckload delivery out here. So this is called a consolidation center. A break bulk is plant. It just crosses the dock. So it comes in. This is very similar to what we're going to see at FedEx. It's like a freight terminal. Nothing is stored in a freight terminal. It comes in, it comes off of a truck, it goes on another truck, and it leaves that night. And that's a break bulk type operation. So that's, or a cross dock operation. And so this is an example of that. So it comes in and it goes out immediately. Again, no storage. If you look at a distribution center, you have multiple sources coming into a storage facility, where it's then inventoried, it's picked, processed, packaged, sorted, labeled, you name it, and then it's on behalf of a specific customer. So that's what the distribution center is. And then there are warehouses specific to reverse logistics. So in the event that the customer is returning goods, or the retailer is returning goods, or somebody's returning goods, not just a retailer, anybody returning goods, Caterpillar has reverse logistics. So those goods come from that customer back into that single warehouse, where they do a deep dive and gather significant amounts of data to understand what happens. And then once they do that, they then send that either into the secondary market, or they recycle it, or do whatever they're going to do. So there are specialty type warehouses. And I was in this business for 10 years right here. That's what I did for 10 years. So for some fairly large consumer goods companies. So let's look at some other types. So we looked at consolidation, we looked at break bulk, we looked at distribution centers, but there's also postponement warehouses, which is basically you're going to bring goods in, but you're not going to make it into a finished product until the very last minute. If it's, let's say it's a custom order. So if you're making kits or things like that, you don't make the kit until you have an order for it. So you don't, because when you make the kit, you've increased the value of the inventory. So you don't do that. The market presence, the whole idea of you have to be in the market, regardless of whether for whatever reason you need, you have to, a good example would be, an emerging market, if you will. You have to be in country, you have to have that market presence, and you can't ship direct from plant or anything like that. We talked about the bonded. The hyper-local is the new one now, where we're seeing the whole idea of 2-hour delivery services and things like that. This is starting now to move into the neighborhoods. In many cases, it's empty retail space, or mall space. Chesterfield Mall, for example, Crestwood Mall, they're talking about putting these hyper-local things where they're actually e-commerce fulfillment sites, very specific e-commerce fulfillment type sites. They can be lockers, they can be return sites for you. So this is a definition, a new definition, a new type of warehouse called a hyper-local. We even have on-demand. So just like we have Uber, which is on-demand ride sharing, we actually have on-demand warehouses. There's no contract involved. We have a real estate company that's built a building on speculation. You can come in, you say you need it for X number of days, you come in, you take it over for X number of days, and you leave. That's unlike anything you'll see in the industry in public warehousing or contract warehousing. So this flexibility is specifically being driven by the e-commerce world, where people need to come in and do things on a very short-term basis. So this is a new type that's being driven primarily by the industrial real estate business. And then we have things like climate control and what we call cold chain. And there's quite a bit of history with cold chain here in St. Louis, so I'm going to share this with you real quick. So all of you are familiar with one of our major corporate citizens, Anheuser-Busch. Well, Anheuser-Busch, and specifically Adolphus, in the late 1800s, came up with the idea of pasteurization of beer. And in order to ship pasteurized beer without it spoiling, you had to keep it cold chain. So Adolphus came up with some very interesting things. He came up with refrigeration. He came up with refrigerated rail cars, and he actually came up with railside ice houses to keep the goods cold. So there is a little bit of a St. Louis twist to this whole idea of cold chain. He's one of the first guys to be in this because of the pasteurization. So a little thing you didn't know. But regardless of what it is, the DESE operations side of this is fairly straightforward. There's really four things that happen. You receive it, you put it away, you pick it, and then you ship it. So at the end of the day, at a macro level, that's what you do. At a micro level, you do all sorts of other things like this, okay? So here's a list of what a typical service distribution center would be involved in. And so it'd be interesting to see when we go visit these two locations, how much of these kinds of things that they're doing. I draw your attention to this, the 3D printing. 3D printing is a very rapidly accelerating technology. And what it does is it replaces the need to store parts. So if a part needs to be replaced, they'll 3D print it as much as they can, rather than buy a slow-moving part and keep it in inventory for a long period of time. They'll find a way to 3D print it. And the 3D printers now are extremely versatile. Even we were in Monsanto a couple of years ago, and they have one to print tools like wrenches and pliers and stuff. So you can print a propeller for an airplane now. Put the propeller on the airplane and off you go. So, I mean, this is a brand new world, and believe it or not, there are jobs out there in this area. So these are the types of things that you can get involved in. And yeah, sure, a lot of it's physical in some cases, but not all of it by any means. And you can kind of see a little bit of that here. These are the types of jobs you're going to come across here. So they have customer service, they have sales reps, they have industrial engineers, quality managers, they have quality associates, maintenance people, the 3D printing operator. We have IT administrators, we have leads and supervisors and foremen, and we have inventory auditors and safety auditors, and we have all these kinds of jobs that are available within a distribution center that don't require a college education. This is exactly what we want to show you this week. Now, this link, which doesn't look like it works, but we'll see if we can. If this is a YouTube video for Amanda. Amanda works at Target Distribution Center. She's a senior operations manager at Target, and she's going to tell you about her typical day in the warehouse. It takes her about 3 minutes to do that. But I think it'll give you some kind of a sense for what you're going to see when you go into these two locations this week. So tactically, what we try to do is we always want to do better. We want to have the highest level of accuracy we possibly can. We want to control our labor costs. We want to make sure the facility is safe. We want to make sure that it's tip top. And we want to absolutely meet the customer's needs. That's one of the biggest risks that most of the operators feel today, is that, are we meeting and earning the customer's respect and the customer's business? You don't do that if you don't reduce the error. So this whole idea of a perfect order, which we really haven't talked about, but the perfect order is the right product at the right time, at the right place, with the right information, in the right condition, at the right price. So all of that, all those 7 R's that go into that, is what makes the perfect order. And if you do that, then you're going to meet that goal and objective. But job one is always the safe environment. So because there's machinery in here, there's people moving around, and so it's very important that we always maintain that safe environment. So the metrics that we kind of look at here in this business is this, which is safety. Because as you'll see in just a second, if we don't have safety, then we have majorly problems with the federal government and the state. In terms of customer service, we're not going to go through this, but you can see some of the inputs that go into this. We're tracking things down to the case. We're tracking time. We're tracking production. We're tracking weight. We're tracking pieces. We're tracking all this kind of stuff. A lot of this is being done in a systematic way. We have a responsibility for our assets, make sure we're using them as best we can. That is, we're doing the very best job of storage the products, and that we're developing the people we need to continue to carry on and build on their experience as new people come in. So those are kind of the metrics that I would be expecting my distribution center managers to be not expecting. These are the kinds of metrics my distribution center managers were judged on. So let's take a look at labor. So what are we trying to do with labor? We're trying to minimize travel. We're trying to minimize the number of times we touch a product. We're trying to take the paper out of it. And we're trying to find ways through minimizing travel time and congestion, and do a better job of picking products in a more intelligent way to improve productivity. So this kind of gives you an idea of how much time is spent by some of the various activities, and of course order picking is the number one. So when again, you're not seeing necessarily robotic order picking yet, but what you are seeing is you're seeing things like the robot is going into the bulk area and bringing the product to the order filler, basically at that point, who's packaging it up and getting it ready to go. So that's the kind of things we're seeing. And there's an article in this week's Google Doc on the use of robots and what we call collaborative robotics, or cobot. So on the space side, we're looking at all the techniques. This is all called material handling. So we're looking at all the techniques we can to eliminate half-empty spots, parcel cases, things like this. What kind of material handling things can we use? How high can we stack it? Could we stack it higher if we put it in a rack versus on a floor? Do we want to have forward pick lines, or do we want to go to a primary bin and replenish from above? How do we want to do it? Okay, so we also want to maximize the use of the common area, which is the docks and the aisles. So we want the aisles to be as narrow as we can, so we can have as many storage areas as we can, but that means you have to have certain kinds of equipment. So the width of your aisles is dependent upon the type of equipment you're going to have. And so these are all things that kind of go into designing and laying out a warehouse. We use a number of different types of tools here. These are all different kinds of things that we may see this week in terms of picking. And so you might see some of these. Here's the Kiva robot. Kiva is owned by Amazon. This is a robot they use, is the Kiva robot. And they're on, I don't know what generation they're on right now, but we won't see that, though. There are I'll tell you what, we can put a link out there on the Amazon Kiva so you can look at it just to kind of get a sense on it. And not only do I want you to look at it from the standpoint of what it does and how it works, but also just to kind of go back and say, we talked about somebody's got to fix these. And I'm still absolutely persuaded that there's an opportunity here in St. Louis for that, and we're missing it. You can see voice pick. We have Google Glass. We have barcodes. We have RFID tags. We have pick by light. So all these types of technologies are out there now and are deployed in different ways. The functionality of a warehouse management system, you'll probably use the acronym WMS, and so now you know what that means, is this. So in the WMS, the warehouse associate is directed where to go. And they're directed where to go, generally by a radio message, a very short two-sentence radio message. Go to bin A101. You go to bin A101, you tell the system you're there by scanning the location tag, and it says, pick 2 cases of this. And that's what you do. Then you scan them, and you get your 2 cases. And then it says, go to bin 102, do this, and so forth and so on. And then when your order is done, it says, take it to this particular area. So you can see all the things that WMS systems do. And they are very connected devices now. So if you have a cooler, like we saw at Flat World, remember they had a cooler? There actually are sensors in there that are connected to the warehouse management system that is making sure that the temperature controls are being kept. Now, if you're talking about pharmaceuticals, that's critical because that's a good manufacturing practice record. So those records have to be retained. So these are all this is being done now within this WMS functionality, where before it was being done by a warehouse supervisor who was handing paper out or doing whatever they were doing. And I was one of those guys for a while. I mean, one of my first jobs at Brunswick was to go in and substitute for vacation time for our warehouse supervisor. This kind of stuff was not available then. So it's something you had to do manually. Boy, has it come a long ways, because I've implemented 6 or 7 of these systems now, and there's no getting around it. This is the way to go. Safety. This is a big deal. This is a really big deal because any employee can file a complaint with OSHA, whether it's true or not true. And OSHA has to come out and inspect. And if OSHA comes out and inspect, I guarantee you they're going to find 12 things wrong. And each one of those things is going to cost you $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 in fines. And then you go talk to them, have a cup of coffee, and all of a sudden some of them go away. Some of them you have to fix. There's no question about it. And they're absolutely relative. But the first time they scare the devil out of you, and then you're a lot more attentive for the next one. That's for sure. You have the fire department will show up. The police department will show up. The air quality people will show up, and they're all looking for records regarding all the activity within the HVAC system or the fire pump. When's the last time that you ran a fire test? Ventilation, noise abatement. Do you have your compressed gas outside or is it inside? So all of these types of things, your hazardous materials, your personal protective equipment, all of this type of activity is fair game for the government agencies to come in and take a look at. And that's why we'll try to discuss this with them this week, what they do on safety. Having sat through these before, you really do pay attention to it. And you really pay attention to it when you're talking about the fire department particularly, because these guys you need. And you need all these people, but these are guys you do not want to get upset at you. And so that's regardless of what city you're in. You make friends with these guys. You do what they say, and that's the end of the game. So we're almost there now. What's happening in St. Louis? Remarkable. You can tell the growth of distribution by the industrial real estate market. And the industrial real estate market has been going great guns for the last couple of years. Sure, a lot of it's Amazon, but there's a lot of other players out there that have also come into the city or come into the region, not the city, to the region and have built distribution centers. That's partly because they have to be closer to the market as the delivery cycle time becomes compressed. It's also partly because the cost of real estate and leasing in the bigger markets is just gone through the roof. So they're coming to the secondary markets and to take some of that cost off. So you can deliver from Chicago to St. Louis next day, not in 2 hours, but you can do it the next day and do it consistently and reliably. But the cost of a distribution center in Chicago is going to be a lot more than it costs here. So the question is, you trade those costs off we spoke about. So what is it? Is there space, and can that space be built up and made available in a rapid manner? And St. Louis right now can do that. We have a job-ready workforce. I think the issue that I think we're struggling with in this session is where is that? I mean, from a demographic standpoint, where's that workforce? And how do we get that workforce from wherever it is to where we need to get it? And I think that's something that we need to be addressing here during these 4 sessions. And then you have to have a freight infrastructure. Now, the freight infrastructure in St. Louis is quite good. You heard that from Mary Lamy. There's a lot of room for improvement on it, but it's a lot better than a lot of other cities. So, and metropolitan areas. So I think we still have an advantage here. We could do a lot better, and hopefully we will. So in sum, what do we know about this? Well, right now, most of the industrial real estate sectors and the distribution center operators are doing quite well. A lot of that's being driven by e-commerce in some areas, but the projection for 2018 is still strong growth in this area, which means employment. There's issues out there. There's a lot of uncertainty out there. There's uncertainty about how much further the economy can grow. Is it on the cusp of falling apart, recession or depression? There's questions around policy. The whole deal on trade and tariffs will have an impact. We're already seeing that on some commodities, particularly grains and farm commodities, where our biggest buyer has radically canceled orders. Part of that is seasonal, but part of it will probably still be there by the end of the year. So that's kind of an issue for us. And I think the other one I mentioned to you is the customers' demands. There's continued to be more, that is us, more and more demanding. And everybody seems to want to step the game up and continue to raise the bar. So like putting your package in your trunk, which is not for everybody. So there's a place for it, but there's still a lot of room for the traditional, I'm going to go to Kinko's and pick it up, or the UPS store pick it up, or I'm going to go to Walmart and pick up my package at the Walmart kiosk at the front of the building. And then I'm going to go to the grocery store. So, there's a lot of things that all these companies are trying to figure out what to do. The other thing is the talent. I mean, where are we going to get the people to do this? And so this plays right into our hand here. And then finally, it's all about technology. So this is the driver. And so anyone who comes into this industry needs to understand the technology side. It's very likely at some stage of the game, you're going to be working alongside a robot in the larger operators, not necessarily in the smaller operators, but in the larger operators, yes, there's going to be some cobot type things. In the smaller operators, it's still going to be all those activities that are being done, but they're not going to have the robot. They're going to have associates doing it. So the more that our students understand the kinds of jobs that are out there and what they're expected to do, which we hope to accomplish this week during our visits, the better prepared they will be to go in and really do a knockout interview. So that's it, and thanks for listening, and we'll see you later on this week.